All right, so you know that stereotype, right, about Americans being terrible at saving, like always spending, never thinking about the future?
Mm.
Well, it turns out that may not be the whole story.
Right.
Today, we're diving into the world of inheritances.
Interesting.
Like what motivates people to save or not save for their heirs, and what surprising factors influence those decisions.
Yeah.
We're going to be looking at excerpts from an article called Inheritance After Retirement, Intention and Reality.
Oh, okay.
It actually features some great insights from this economist named John Bailey Jones,
Oh, yeah.
who specializes in how people spend money over their lifetimes.
Yeah.
And believe me, there are some surprising twists and turns.
I bet.
So,
So to kick us off,
yeah.
it turns out that a surprising 60% of Americans actually leave behind an inheritance.
60%. That's way more than I would have guessed.
Yeah, it's a lot.
It makes you wonder if we're all secretly hoarders at heart.
Right.
So, the first puzzle is, why are people saving so much when they're supposed to be enjoying their golden years?
Yeah.
I think they'd be out there traveling the world, spoiling their grandkids, finally buying that sports car,
Right.
living it up.
Living it up, yeah.
But it seems like there's more to it than just sipping margaritas on a beach somewhere.
Yeah, for sure.
So what's the deal? Why are people holding on to all this cash?
Well, one important distinction to make is the difference between intentional and unintentional bequests.
Okay.
So intentional bequests are, planned gifts like grandma and grandpa setting aside money for the grandkids' college fund.
Right.
Unintentional bequests happen when someone saves for a specific purpose, like medical expenses,
Mhm.
but ends up not needing all of it.
Oh, so they were being super cautious about potential nursing home costs.
Right.
But then they stayed healthy and active, and bam, unintentional inheritance.
Exactly.
Wow.
And this is where it gets kind of tricky for researchers.
Yeah.
It's not always easy to tell these two types of bequests apart just by looking at the numbers.
Right. Like imagine someone leaving behind $150,000. Did they carefully plan that for their kids, or were they just, being extra cautious about medical bills?
Right. It's hard to say.
It's tough to say.
Yeah. And the article actually uses a really interesting anecdote to illustrate this point.
Okay.
Let's say you have $150,000 saved up.
Okay.
You might decide not to save super aggressively for that potential nursing home stay
Right.
because you'll likely qualify for Medicaid if your money runs out.
Ah, so you're factoring in the safety net.
Yeah.
Okay.
But that decision can lead to a pretty significant bequest, whether you planned it that way or not.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have this mystery. People are leaving inheritances, but we don't always know why.
Right.
What are the main theories that economists are using to kind of try to explain this behavior?
Well, there are two main economic models that researchers use.
Yeah.
One is focused on the idea that people are mainly saving for potential medical expenses, which could lead to those unintentional bequests. The other model is based on the idea that people are intentionally saving with the goal of leaving something behind for their heirs.
Okay.
And here's the thing. Both models can actually result in very similar inheritance patterns.
So it's kind of like two different paths leading to the same destination.
Exactly. It's a puzzle that economists are still trying to piece together.
Yeah, and it makes it even harder to figure out what is really driving those decisions.
For sure.
But you know what? Here's a question that pops into my mind.
Yeah.
If people really want to help their kids, why not just give them the money while they're alive?
That's a great question. And there are a few possible explanations.
Okay.
One factor is the illiquidity of certain assets.
Okay.
For a lot of people, their main asset is their house. And selling a house is complicated. It's an emotional process, especially for older adults.
Yeah, it's not always as simple as writing a check, especially when you're talking about something as big as a house.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
Another factor is what's called the strategic bequest motive. And this is the idea that some people might hold on to their wealth as a way to encourage care and attention from their children.
Okay, so this is where things get a little bit Machiavellian, right?
Maybe a little bit.
Like, love you, kid, but make sure to visit often or else.
Right.
But seriously, is this how families operate?
Well, research does suggest that primary caregivers tend to receive larger inheritances.
Okay.
But it's important to note that the amounts often only offset their lost income from providing that care.
Oh, so it's not like a huge windfall.
Right.
It's more like a thank you and a way to make things a bit more even.
Exactly. Like John Bailey Jones puts it, there's something of a strategic bequest motive, but at the end of the day, love seems to matter. It's a mix of things.
Yeah, it's not a simple equation.
Not at all.
And this whole caregiving thing, brings up another interesting point.
Yeah.
The article mentions this idea that directly compensating family caregivers might be a better solution than relying on Medicaid for long-term care, especially for folks with limited resources.
That's a really interesting idea.
Yeah.
And, if we think about the bigger picture, we're talking about how society supports older adults and their families, during a vulnerable time.
Right.
And is our current system really the most effective? Is it the most compassionate?
Right.
Maybe there are other models worth exploring.
Absolutely. That's a conversation I think that we need to be having as a society.
Yeah.
But okay, let's get back to these economists who are trying to decipher people's inheritance intentions.
Okay.
What methods do they use to try to figure out what's really going on in people's minds?
Well, one approach is they just ask people directly.
Okay.
The article talks about economist Andrew Kaplan, who uses surveys to gauge people's saving motivations.
Okay.
And his work showed that medical expenses often topped the list,
Interesting.
suggesting that fear of healthcare costs might be a stronger driver than the desire to leave a legacy.
So peace of mind about those medical bills might be trumping the urge to be a generous benefactor.
For some people, yeah.
Okay.
Another puzzle that economists are grappling with is this lack of long-term care insurance purchases.
Oh, that's a good point.
If people are so worried about these huge healthcare costs, why not insure against them?
Right. You would think that would be a no-brainer if that was a primary concern.
Yeah.
What's the deal with that?
It might be that people don't understand these policies,
Okay.
or maybe they're just overconfident in their own health.
Yeah.
But it does make you wonder
Yeah.
about the real reasons behind people's saving motivations.
Okay, so we have surveys hinting at these medical anxieties.
Yeah.
And a lack of insurance purchases kind of muddying the waters a little bit. What other detective work are these economic sleuths up to?
Well, one really fascinating study comes from Norway.
Okay.
Researchers looked at widowed individuals who had been diagnosed with terminal cancer.
Whoa, that's a heavy situation.
It is.
Yeah.
But it offered a unique window into people's true intentions because the uncertainty about lifespan and healthcare needs was basically removed.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What did they find?
They found that these individuals, even knowing their time was limited, tended to make significant transfers of wealth to loved ones rather than spending lavishly on themselves.
Wow. Even facing their own mortality, they were still prioritizing taking care of their loved ones.
Yeah.
That's really powerful.
It suggests that the desire to care for others can be an incredibly strong motivator,
Yeah.
even in the face of death.
Definitely makes you think.
Right.
But, this whole discussion about motivations brings up another question. Can we even judge the rationality of these saving decisions?
That's a tough one.
Everyone's circumstances and preferences are different.
Absolutely.
What might seem perfectly rational to one person
Right.
might seem totally illogical to another.
Exactly.
Someone might prioritize, lavish travel and experiences in their later years,
All right.
while others might find comfort and security in knowing they have a substantial nest egg.
For sure, there's no right or wrong answer.
And just to add another layer of complexity, the article clarifies that while Medicare covers a lot of acute medical expenses, it doesn't cover long-term care.
Right.
And this leaves many wealthy individuals worried about the possibility of having to rely on Medicaid.
That's a crucial point.
Yeah.
Because even individuals with significant wealth might be concerned about the financial and quality of care implications of needing long-term care.
Right.
So it definitely influences their saving decisions.
So even the haves have anxieties when it comes to aging and healthcare.
Yeah, it's a universal concern.
This inheritance enigma is getting more and more intriguing the deeper we go.
I know, right?
All right, so to bring it back to John Bailey Jones, the article ends by sharing his personal approach to inheritance.
Okay.
He's actually chosen to prioritize paying for his children's college education outright, rather than focusing on these future bequests.
Interesting.
So he's investing in their present, rather than leaving them a potential windfall in the future. What do you make of that approach?
Well, I think it just reflects his values and priorities.
Yeah.
He's choosing to provide a tangible benefit to his children while they're young and building their lives.
Yeah.
It's a different approach, but certainly a valid one.
For sure, it all comes back to those individual choices and what people deem most important.
Yeah.
And that seems like a great place to pause for a moment.
Okay.
Don't worry, we'll be back soon with more insights from the deep dive.
Sounds good.
See ya then. Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of inheritances. Before the break, we were talking about John Bailey Jones's decision to pay for his kids' college instead of leaving them like a big inheritance. It really got me thinking, is there kind of like an unspoken pressure,
Yeah.
especially among certain groups,
Yeah.
that leaving a hefty inheritance is what, like, responsible, successful people do?
That's a really interesting question, and it kind of points to this idea that, inheritances aren't just about money. They're about values, societal expectations, and even, dare I say, a little bit of keeping up with the Joneses.
Right. It's like this unspoken competition to amass wealth and then pass it down as proof that you've made it.
Exactly.
But, before we get too deep into the psychology of it all,
Yeah.
let's talk numbers.
Okay.
When we talk about inheritances, how much are we actually talking about? Are these typically small nest eggs or like life-changing sums of money?
Well, the article gives us some interesting data on that.
Okay.
It turns out that over half of the inheritances in the U.S. between 1995 and 2016 were valued at less than $50,000.
So for most people, it's not exactly winning the lottery.
Right.
Okay.
But here's where it gets interesting. Only 2% of inheritances were for $1 million or more.
Okay.
And get this, those big inheritances accounted for a whopping 40% of the total wealth transferred.
Wow, that's mind-blowing.
It is.
We're talking about a tiny elite controlling a huge chunk of the inheritance pie.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder about the impact on, like, wealth inequality.
Right.
Does this just keep the rich getting richer?
Well, it's definitely something to think about.
Oh.
When such a large percentage of inherited wealth is concentrated in the hands of so few, it can definitely make it harder for others to climb the economic ladder.
Right.
It's a complex issue with no easy answers, but it's something we need to be aware of as we think about this whole idea of inheritance.
For sure. So we've talked about the what and the how much of inheritances.
Yeah.
But I think the most intriguing part is the why.
Right.
What's the underlying psychology at play here?
Yeah.
Why do people feel compelled to save and pass on their wealth, even when there might be other ways to support their loved ones while they're alive?
You've hit the nail on the head. It's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And unfortunately, there's no single easy answer.
Right.
It's probably a mix of psychological, social, and economic factors.
It's probably different for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Some people might be driven by a sense of legacy, wanting to leave their mark on the world through their wealth. Others might be motivated by this deep sense of responsibility towards their family, wanting to make sure their kids and grandkids have a secure future.
Exactly. And you can't discount the emotional aspect either.
Right.
Leaving an inheritance can be a way of expressing love, or maybe even trying to make amends for past mistakes.
Right.
There's a lot of emotion tied up in these decisions.
It's almost like they're trying to exert their influence from beyond the grave. Like, I may be gone, but here's how I want you to use this money.
Yeah, there might be an element of control there for sure.
Right.
Some people try to use their inheritance to shape their loved ones' choices even after they're gone. They might attach specific conditions to their bequests, set up trusts to manage the funds, or even use the inheritance as a way to encourage certain behaviors.
Which brings up another point. The article talked about this strategic bequest motive.
Yes.
And didn't it say that sometimes caregivers receive larger inheritances?
Right?
Almost like a reward for their efforts?
Yeah, the research does suggest that primary caregivers often receive more.
Okay.
It might be a way for parents to acknowledge the sacrifices that their children have made, or it could be a more calculated move to ensure continued care.
Right. It makes you wonder, is that truly altruistic? Or is there a hint of manipulation there?
Yeah, it's a gray area for sure.
Like, I'm leaving you more, but make sure you keep visiting and taking care of the house.
Right, exactly. And it ties back to that question you asked earlier about societal expectations.
Yeah.
In some cultures, leaving an inheritance is seen as a duty.
Right.
Like a marker of success and responsibility. And that can put a lot of pressure on individuals, even if their personal values don't really align with that tradition.
Absolutely. It's like this unspoken obligation hanging over people's heads.
Yeah.
Adding another layer of complexity to an already emotionally charged topic.
For sure.
It really makes you think.
It does, and it highlights how inheritances aren't just about the money itself, but about the values, the relationships, and all those unspoken expectations that surround wealth and family.
So true. And it seems like we've only just scratched the surface of this whole inheritance enigma.
Yeah.
There's still so much to explore and understand. But before we go any further, I think it's time to shift gears a bit and turn the conversation over to you, our listener.
Absolutely. We've been throwing a lot of information your way, and now we're curious to hear your thoughts. We've got a big question to get you thinking.
Okay, listeners. So we've been unpacking this whole inheritance enigma, exploring, the motivations, the economics, and even the psychology behind why people choose to leave money behind. Now, we want to hear from you.
Exactly.
If you could design the ideal system for supporting older adults and their families as they age, what would it look like?
Ooh, that's a big one.
Right. Yeah, there are so many things to consider.
Yeah.
Would you prioritize like professional care like nursing homes or in-home aides? Or would you encourage a system where family members take on more of those caregiving responsibilities?
Yeah, and what about the financial side of things?
Right.
Would inheritances still play a big role in your ideal system, or would you aim for more robust social safety nets so that people don't have to rely on inheriting money to cover things like long-term care?
Yeah, these are really tough questions. And, there are no easy answers.
Right.
It all comes down to like our values as a society.
Right?
What do we prioritize? Individual responsibility or collective care?
Yeah.
Family obligations or personal freedom?
And let's not forget the emotional side of things, too.
Right.
How do we create a system that's not just practical, but also compassionate and supportive?
Yeah.
One that honors the dignity and autonomy of older adults while also providing the care and support that they need.
I think this whole conversation really gets to the heart of what it means to age with dignity and security.
For sure.
And we want to know what you think.
Yeah.
Head over to our website or social media pages and share your ideas.
Tell us what your ideal system looks like.
We're all aging, and how we care for ourselves and our loved ones as we get older is something that affects everyone.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a conversation that deserves our attention, our empathy, and our willingness to think outside the box.
Couldn't agree more.
We may not have all the answers, but by exploring these complex issues together,
Right.
we can hopefully start to build a world that's more compassionate and supportive for everyone,
Exactly.
regardless of age or financial status.
Yeah, well said.
Well, that's it for our deep dive into the world of inheritances.
Yeah,
We hope you enjoyed the journey.
I know I did.
And as always, keep those brains curious and keep those conversations going.
Yes.
We'll catch you on the next deep dive.
See you then.